What started as a peaceful protest in Nova Scotia took a not-so-peaceful turn today outside an event where Premier Tim Houston was speaking. Now, we're going to show you the moment Houston emerged from the Annapolis Valley Chamber of Commerce event to get into a vehicle which quickly was surrounded. Okay, that is not so unusual, but protesters later climbed on top of the vehicle. Some sat in front of it, others banged on it, causing the windshield of the Premier's vehicle to smash. Eventually, police had to escort Premier Houston out of the SUV and into a marked RCMP vehicle to get him to safety. The CBC's Michael Gorman was there to watch this all turn south, and he joins me now from Halifax. So, you know, Michael, protests, nothing new in politics, but that escalated quickly. I mean, what happened and what were those people protesting at this event?
Well, the interesting thing, David, is we actually showed up about an hour early for the speech because we were told that there was going to be a protest about the potential closure of some local library branches. And in fact, that did happen. It was about 50 people, children, their parents, some senior citizens, very calm, very peaceful. They didn't end up getting a chance to see or speak to the Premier. But during his appearance at the Chamber of Commerce, you could hear the crowd outside getting louder and louder. And when I looked out the window, the crowd had grown by 2 or 3 times the size that it originally was. And it was a lot of people protesting a lot of things beside libraries. There were people there protesting an issue quite prominent here in this province, which is Mi'kmaq who want the right to sell cannabis at areas other than provincially regulated outlets.
Right.
There were people there protesting the government's efforts to increase natural resource development. Government is looking at bringing fracking into the province. That has people riled up. And other environmental concerns in particular. You had all these disparate views together. And I will say, not everybody was completely amped up the way that you see in that video. But what you do see in that video is a concentration of people there who were very angry and quickly descended on the Premier's vehicle.
Okay, so Michael, just to be clear, as I'm looking at this photo, and you can see people sitting on the roof of the vehicle here. The Premier normally drives like a black SUV. That was sent as a decoy. They tried to sneak him out and get him into this, and that's when it got swarmed, right? It was that kind of event. Am I understanding it correctly? That's how he tried to get away?
That's correct.
Yeah.
On the other side of the building was where his black SUV was parked, and someone came out and actually got into it and turned it on, kind of to act as a decoy. And not long after that, he was out the other door, but there were enough people on the other side and a short enough distance between the two vehicles that people quickly pivoted and went towards the other car.
Okay, so look, you've reached out to the Premier's office for a response to what happened here. Just quickly, Michael, what are you hearing from Tim Houston and his team?
His office put out a statement not long ago. He said, in effect, that he's willing to engage with anyone. This tour that he's doing of chambers of commerce across the province, he says, is evidence of that. But he said that what happened today is in no way conducive to engaging in meaningful dialogue. He credited the police for the way they intervened. One person was arrested and released without charges. And the Premier is planning to be at his next Chamber of Commerce stop tomorrow.
Okay, Michael, thank you so much. That's the CBC's Michael Gorman in Halifax for us today. All right, we're going to start there with the power panel. We've got Stevie O'Brien, who is a former chief of staff to Liberal cabinet ministers, Tim Powers, who has worked as a strategist for Conservative parties, and Sherelle Evelyn. She is the managing editor of the Hill Times. Tim, I know you've been on top of a car a couple of times in your life, but have you seen anything like that with the Premier? It got to a point that could have gone really bad before it eventually just stopped at a smashed windshield.
Actually, the only thing that I can remember like that, and you will too, is many, many years ago when John Crosbie closed the northern cod fishery. He was swarmed on a wharf, and also at that was a couple of days after, and the announcement, the room where he's making the announcement also was stormed on that day. And there's that great photo, of course, of now Supreme Court Justice Malcolm Rowe trying to tackle somebody getting in there. But none of this is acceptable. It's fascinating on a couple of levels. While Tim Houston's government is being criticized for decisions they have made, Tim Houston himself is a very mild-mannered, polarizing figure. And he has shown in different circumstances that he's open to meeting people. He shouldn't be subject to this. No political leader should be subject to this. Nobody should be subject to this. And the problem when people do this is they create a space now where politicians are going to be advised to take a little bit more distance, add a little bit more security, and rightly so. And they don't make a good case for what it is they're trying to argue about, because the whole story now, as it should be, is a premier being threatened. And it did look like there were a couple of people in those photos. Obviously, the premier already has some security. You saw the individuals with the vests on, which suggests they're security officers. But still, even they being there with all those people there, you feel for Houston.
Yeah, the Crosby moment you talk about was quite a thing, but that was the closure of
that was
a sustaining founding industry. People were trying to beat down the doors of the Delta Hotel to get inside, and Tonda McCharles was in asking questions, undaunted by it all, because she's Tonda McCharles, and that's the way she is. Stevie, what did you make of what we saw there? Tim Houston has had a run of some controversies in Nova Scotia lately with various budgeting decisions and other things, but jumping on your car and smashing in your windshield is a different kind of thing.
So yeah, he's definitely being criticized for what others have called a sort of cruel and clumsy budget and a bunch of cuts to vulnerable groups that were not strategically thought out. And I think it's correct that people are upset, and it's not surprising that people are upset. The level of intensity is interesting. It reminds me a little bit of just all of the anger around the Occupy Wall Street, Occupy Toronto, just that there's a level of discontent. And I think you see it in the youth, you see it in communities that are being sort of impacted in these really trying times. Of course, the level of getting to the point of violence or threats is never okay. It dissuades people from entering politics and good people from participating in politics, and we need to take steps to move away from that. But I think we also need to take note that there's a lot of very angry people in Nova Scotia.
Yeah, Charlotte kind of reminded me a little bit of one of the COVID elections. There was a group of people following Prime Minister Trudeau around, throwing gravel at him in London. I think that same person is now charged with uttering threats against Mark Carney, so there's bigger issues at play there. But it is an escalation of a protest that we don't usually see.
No, you don't usually see it, but at the same time, it is an escalation that has, it's been escalating pretty much since COVID. There's been that level of anger, and people don't really have an outlet for it. Saying things online isn't enough. They seem to need to step forward, whether it's the person who rammed the gates at Rideau Hall, and there's all these elements of violence or potential violence or attempted violence towards politicians. We saw it here on Parliament Hill, to the point where they had to essentially close off the gates at Parliament Hill, so you couldn't get up. You couldn't just walk onto the hill without a pass at certain entry points, simply because politicians were being followed and swarmed and those types of things. So it does, as Tim pointed out, it does create that level of distance where people no longer want to engage, no longer want to talk, no longer want to have that dialogue and discourse that might eventually help solve some of the issues that they're potentially the politicians themselves have created by making these decisions, which people are angry about. As he said, people have a right to be angry about some of these decisions, but when that becomes the story, the fact that half the libraries are closing in the region, that is no longer the focus. It is now, how can we protect the politicians? How can we create that distance? How can we have a peaceful dialogue when what people really want is change? They don't want the peaceful dialogue. They want to see action taken.
Yeah, when I was talking to Michael Gorman earlier today about what exactly happened there, it's like people are upset about uranium developments, of fracking, about selling cannabis, as he said, in Mi'kmaq communities and a bunch of other things. But Tim, it is sort of a continuation of sort of this broader societal anger that's existed since COVID, right? We all went through this collective trauma together, and nobody's even begun to process it in a healthy way.
Well, and you go back to, was it Michael Wernick said about threats when he was the clerk or after he became the clerk, and he testified that it's getting more dangerous out there and people are angry and they think it is acceptable to manifest their anger on public figures. We've seen in other jurisdictions, the UK in particular, where politicians who haven't been the leaders of their parties and others have had some terrible terrible things and happen to them
Joe
all.
Cox was murdered.
Yeah, Joe
right?
Cox was
Susan
murdered,
River
and we're
Park.
seeing that here. But again, you're not solving problems by wanting to punish somebody who's in the position of decision-making authority. And if you continue to scare people away, to what Sherelle was saying, you're going to have a really dysfunctional democracy. So people ought to think about what they're doing when they get hyped up and amped up in circumstances like that.
It's interesting, Stevie. I've been covering politics at either at the provincial or national level now for about 25 years. And I remember covering the premiers of Newfoundland back in the day. They didn't have security.
They had none.
They had no bodyguard of any kind unless it was the middle of a big strike or a controversy. Now it's everywhere, and layers of it, no matter how small the province or territory.
I think it's part of the breakdown of some of our institutions as well. We don't, the political discourse, the way people talk online, the way they talk, they feel safe to even talk in the House, the way the politicians from all parties are much more comfortable going to extremes with language. I don't think that helps create the environment for peaceful protests and constructive dialogues and those sorts of expressions of civil discontent. People are very frustrated and they don't have many levers, especially ones that they trust are going to result in change. And I think when it gets all bottled up, for some people that they have maybe not, collective trauma as well, but they don't have another outlet. This is not to condone this at all, but I think that's probably part of the story.
Cheryl, last word to you on this topic. I'm going to switch to something a little bit more normal and mainstream for this show.
Well, as Stevie referenced earlier, when you talk about wanting to get people into politics and who is going to be you want people who are going to get involved and engaged or maybe from some of these marginalized groups who are from some of these more vulnerable communities that have that on the ground experience. And this is not going to be something that they're going to look at and say, yes, I want to be a part of that institution.